It's a yoga chair. It's great for typing, but it's not good for sitting up and looking.
It's a funny little game we have to play. Yeah.
So I might as well make myself comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So great. All right. So we're going to start now. And I really want to welcome Peter Moon here. I met Peter, I don't know, is it 8-10 years ago, something like that. We were both training with our CFO, Roosevelt Gainey, out on Coney Island, and training doing some internal martial arts of Qigong. And Peter was born and raised in California. He's primarily known for his investigation of space-time projects. So we're going to talk a lot about time travel today. I hope that's got everybody excited. And these concerns projects in the past, present, and future that both control time and the perception of time. This began in 1990 when Peter met scientist Preston Nichols, one of the world's foremost experts in the world on electromagnetic phenomena, who had been involved in strange experiments at the Montauk Air Force Station on Long Island, which included the manipulation of time. Their collaboration in writing the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time, and its subsequent sequels have now reached legendary proportions. Peter's work caught the attention of time control scientist Dr. David Anderson of the Time Travel Research Center on Long Island, now reincorporated as the Anderson Institute in the southwestern U.S. He invited him to Romania and paved the way for him to investigate other space-time projects as discussed in the books known as the Transylvania series, one of which includes what has been called the most amazing archaeological artifact in the history of mankind, a chamber that holds a holographic record of the Earth's history, as well as holographic readouts of human DNA and also other species. Peter's own journeys into Romania have become legendary. He's recently released a new series of videos, Time Travel Theory Explained, and we're going to give you that link shortly so that in very simple language, the actual scientific principles demonstrating that time travel is within the boundaries of ordinary mathematics and physics. So, Peter, you've been quite a busy man, and from the time I've known you, you've been pumping out books and journals and newsletters and publishing all kinds of things. This whole concept of this time travel, what originally brought you to start delving really deep into that?
Well, you met me in 2007, and
Okay.
right
So
before,
11 years ago. Wow, that's funny.
and I first went to Romania in 2008. So you met me right at the juxtaposition of
Okay.
my professional career, going from Montauk, research at Montauk to Romania and ultimately Transylvania, which is a part of Romania. I got involved in time travel when I, as was alluded to before, when I met Preston Nichols. I had, the only interest I'd ever had in time travel was my favorite television show, The Time Tunnel, which was in the early mid-60s. And it was also the favorite show of Preston Nichols. And anyway, but he was a scientist involved in it. I was not, involved in any scientific pursuits in that. I was interested in a device. I was introduced to him as an inventor. He was an inventor, and he had a device that was designed for balancing the chakras. And I went to check it out. And when I checked it out, I got much more than I bargained for. I didn't see the device. I met him, and there was a lecture with him and some of the players involved in the Philadelphia and Montauk project. And it was a lecture on Earth changes, and my ears were perked up. I went back to several meetings, and after about 6 months of feeling him out and getting to know him and hear his various stories, I signed a contract to write a book with him, which was essentially, I would serve as a ghostwriter. And at that point, I did not publish it. I soon learned that the most effective way was to publish it myself. I was already in the creative arts, so this was not a big leap. Although it was a leap, it was not a big leap. And so we published the book and formed Skybooks. And when I say me, it was my wife and I at the time. She was the artist, and this book took off. It took off and changed the rest of my life. So it was telling this story about the Montauk Project, which is a series of experiments that concern mind control and manipulating the energy of the mind and using radio frequency technology to amplify the powers of the mind. And when you can amplify the powers of the mind to influence thinking and thoughts, it was eventually used to change physical matter, experiment with telekinesis, whatever you can imagine. But the apex of it was to change time itself.
So this is really fascinating. But so will you say they were investigating this and researching this? Who is they?
They is the secret control group. We don't know who they are. We just know what we do know about they is largely from Preston Nichols. And there were certain people involved, but at what level? Where do you get to the core? It's like, who's really connecting all the financial intrigue of the world?
Yeah.
You can't pin it down to visible, traceable people. If you could, they wouldn't probably be very good at doing what they're doing.
That actually makes perfect sense. And when you first heard about this, what was your reaction?
It was of extreme interest because I was hearing things that I'd never heard before.
Yeah.
And where do you index this? Where do you correlate this? So my first reaction was to find out as much as I could about it.
Yeah.
And of course, the Preston Nichols was the primary source of information. He was not the sole source of information, because around him at the time were different people. Most of them were not publicly available, but there was a whole series of people, places, events, and circumstances that I was exposed to that made it very obvious that there was something that went down here. What exactly was, whether it was exactly as the book portrays, the book being the Montauk Project Experiments in Time by Preston Nichols and Peter Moon, if it's exactly the way he said it was, is it's partly the way he said it was, this was an attempt by him to synthesize the events and circumstances of his own life and how they related to Montauk. And he was fed a lot of information by different people that led him here and led him there. And it was not his sole discovery, but he was the curator of the information, the curator of the story. And
is Peter Nichols still alive?
Preston Nichols.
Preston Nichols, sorry. Is he still alive?
He's still alive. He's born, his birth is 1945. So he's, he just turned, I guess, does that make him 73? Yeah, 73.
Okay.
And he lives at upstate New York, in Cairo, New York, spelled like Cairo, Egypt. And he's basically retired and not in the best of health.
So have you seen these time travels? Have you yourself been able to time travel using any of this knowledge? Or would you be willing to share?
I've never tried time travel. I've never tried. Writing the book, I did have a time travel experience in the dream state, which was very realistic.
Yeah.
And I was brought back. It's an interesting dream. I was with Preston, and we were in an abandoned, looked like a factory or facility, and there were two stalls, like closets, and each one had what looked like a hot plate on a stove, but it was big. And we both got on it. He directed me to get on it. We both went on it. It was like a coil. We got out, and we were in 1943, which was the time of the Philadelphia experiment. We walked back, and we saw a bunch of Army vehicles, and Duncan Cameron, who was the lead psychic time traveler in the project, is on the flatbed, And he looks at me and points and he says, we've got a piece of equipment that needs to be fixed. And he's directly talking to me. And I'm a little shocked because I'm not somebody who fixes equipment. That's not what my facility is. Looking at it now, what I was there to do was to fix the problem with all of this, fix the problem in the continuum. So that was a very penetrating dream. But I did not have, the only experience I had was watching another shift in time. It was a young woman. Well, I don't know how young she was, but she was, middle-aged.
That's young. That's young to all of us now.
Yeah, she was was the first person ever to write in and say that she was a part of the experiments. And she said she used to be taken out there by her parents through the, I think it was the Civil Air Patrol. Now, the Civil Air Patrol is a quasi-government spook agency. That's what David Ferrie from the JFK assassination intrigue was involved with the Civil Air Patrol. So Civil Air Patrol, can send off a red flag. In any case, she was brought out there with her parents under the guise of doing something with the Civil Air Patrol. She remembered this going out to Montauk because they had an airport out. They do have an airport out there. Anyway, this woman, I took her down to meet Preston, and he said that her hand disappeared while he was playing Swan Lake on his music equipment, which was anybody who would listen to Swan Lake and would have feedback, he would say was a time traveler. This was an indication. And she checked out according to his criterion as a time traveler. This is discussed in the book Music of Time. He said that the music of Swan Lake was witness to what's called zero time, and to the creation of the universe. This was his theory experience. He also explained that it was used to balance the energy field, and it was suggested by Bela Lugosi to be played before and after the movie Dracula. And if you listen to Dracula, you will see Swan Lake before and after that particular movie, which he said that his mother told him this story because she knew Uncle Bela, she called him, was not her blood uncle, but her father was involved with Broadway, and when he was, starring on Broadway on Dracula, that's how she knew him. And this story came down to him that way. But in any case, this woman, Maya, she checked out on that according to his criterion. He was pointing at her hand, but I couldn't see her hand, and I would have had to crawl on top of her to see the hand. The room was so small that I was not willing to do that. So I, to get into too close into her space, so I didn't see the hand. He said it disappeared. He was motioning like a wild man for me to look at it. In any case, I would later see Maya many times, but on one particular evening, we were having a meeting, and I was the first one to arrive. I parked in the back lot. I walked to the front of the building, and I was talking to one of the Montauk psychics in front of the building. Frank, his name was. And we're sitting there having a conversation, and then we see Maya drive up in her car. She goes to the back and parks, and before she could get out and walk back, she was walking. Like if it might take 1 minute or 40 seconds to do this, she was there like in 5 or 10 seconds. You don't walk that fast. It's not possible. Yeah. So I said to her, I went upstairs and told her what happened. And she says, no. She says, I got here before you did. I saw you pull up, and I was just fooling around in my car. I was doing all sorts of stuff in my car. She says, no, I saw you in the parking lot. And I said, okay, all right. And then I later realized, no, there was nobody in the parking lot when I came.
Yeah.
So I had another anomalous experience with her where I heard her knock 3 times on my door before she was actually there. The third time she was there. I'd say, come in. So she was out of time. And this is a woman who I talked to, and she would say, like, if you see that situation in the yellow brick road in Oz, when she sees it branches off in two ways.
Right. Yeah.
But she sees the scarecrow. Maya's life is like she could see many different pathways of timelines. And it's very stressful. It's not pleasant.
Stressful for her, or stressful for the people around her who don't know when she's actually there?
For her. It's psychologically stressful. And she's had a challenging life in that respect. So that's the only experience that I've personally had where, at least that I can think of, those two experiences. One is a dream and one is meeting another who was literally involved in this experiments. There's a lot of people who claim to have experiences. Some of them are valid. Many of them are trying to get attention, but all of them have what I guess what you call an incoherency. The coherency is very important because if they are indeed traveling in time, it comes out as a convoluted iteration of experience. Preston Nichols is an example himself. A lot of the things he experiences and says do not make sense to what you would call a logical, ordinary citizen. Although that doesn't mean that he hasn't experienced something. And his science is completely separate from his experience. Well, not completely separate, but he can talk pure science. And then the whole drama is correlating the two. He also knows science that most scientists haven't even heard of, and disciplines. And he can be quite specific about it. He can also be very closed mouth about it.
So how has this changed you? I mean, you've gone on this mission, it seems, to try to help other people understand what is this concept of time travel. Is that a fair statement?
Well, let's say when I did that book, my first mission was to listen to Preston's story and write it down, which I did. That's all the first book is.
So which one is the first book, so we can help people understand?
Experiments in Time. You can see it, the Montauk Project, Experiments in Time. And that book, was his story. Then I proceeded to... And
what year was that one? When did that one come out?
It was released in 1992.
Yeah.
And of course, it had a great grassroots interest and surge. I then began knowing something about some of the people involved. Now, most of these people involved did not want me to talk about it. A lot of people didn't want me to write about it. And it was more, it was more or less out of fear and psychological intimidation that they suffered and were trying to relate to me.
Well, I think we need to intervene here and interject and just say that you and I have had a horrific time trying to get this interview together. And I've interviewed dozens and dozens of people from all over the planet, and I've never had to say I can't do it. I can't even use that particular software. We're going to try a whole set of different software, wait a couple weeks, come back again, and still we're not recording this live. And I'm sure there's a reason why. You may or may not ever hear these bits, but there's clearly something going on that's maybe you are going to need to look at this, and we may need to filter parts of what's said here, or I don't know. It's never happened to me before. People have always been able to connect. We've had it
various
one way out, another way.
Like that. But I've been on so many shows that it's not common for that to happen, but certainly it has happened in the past.
Well, I think this audience in particular are people who many have experienced time travel in one way or another, or have had links between multiple lives, multiple time periods happening at once. So I think you're listening, the audience that's going to listen here is going to be very much in tune to what you're saying, and noticing how there were official, we don't know who they were by, but official systematic experiments done, and how all this works. Because most people I know have had some type of experience like that that's inexplicable and some sort of time bleed from the past, present, or future into the current time. I'm trying to make sense of that.
There's no question. And there's no question of that.
Yeah.
And there's many stories. What's important to me, well, I should follow up by saying I continued to investigate the threads I could find. Now, I had remarkable experience. Well, most of the data trail had been obliterated, shredded, or whatever. But what happened is I began to investigate. I began to find threads of names, and I would experience incredible coincidences or synchronicity, which were too high, out of proportion to what was normal. So I began to follow those traces of synchronicity, one of which led to the discovery that there were pyramids on the ancient land of Montauk, and that it was Native American ground, and that the family name of the royal tribe were known as the Pharaohs. And that further legends or oral history had it that they had ancestors in Egypt. Now, there's a lot to corroborate.
And I just wanted to add in here, you and I haven't spoken for, it's probably 8-10 years. I'm not sure when the last time was that I was out working out with Sifu in Long Island, probably 2010 or something like that. And it's a friend, Essence, who's I'm sure going to be listening to this quite carefully, who said, there's something about Montauk that I need to know. And so she called another friend who lived on Long Island, who lived not far from there. And then she said, call me. And I said, oh, wait, what about Peter Moon? Peter Moon knows everything about Montauk. And so if you'd like to just share a little bit about, continue on that topic of the pyramids and the Indians, what do you think that link is with, I'm assuming, the Egyptian pyramids?
Well, more important than that, well, I will, but there's great occultism behind it as well, which are discussed in the second two books, in other books as well. The Montauk Revisited Adventures in Synchronicity is the second book. The third book is The Pyramids of Montauk. I had to write a whole book to explain the pyramids. Okay. Now, but what's important and how I connected with you is through this. It took me about 10 or 12 years before I was introduced to the medicine man of the Montauk Indians, or Montauk Pharaohs, Artie Crippen, also known as Red Medicine. Now, Artie, I don't know if you ever met Artie.
I think he did. Was he doing he was doing the herbal blends? Was that Artie? No. Herbal drinks. Like, he was like mixing.
Oh, yeah, herbal drinks.
Yeah, like mixing up his own herbs and.
I don't know that he was, anyway, but he started a Qigong program, a longevity program, and I helped him sponsor it when I met him. He told me all sorts of incredible stories, and we connected. And he started a wellness program for the elders of the Montauk tribe, who were declared, by the way, extinct in 1910, but they're still very much alive. That's a whole political issue, because they used the land that was sacred to them to do these time travel experiments on.
Yeah.
So
they already took the land,
But what I'm trying to tell you is he had us doing a wellness program of taking a certain a nutraceutical or an herbal drink, and taking Osha root, which is a Native American root, and also doing Qigong for about 10 minutes a day. So I did 10 minutes of Qigong, but he also, after a month, invited us all to go up to World Tai Chi Day in Connecticut. And this is where I met, in fact, I stood right next to a man, and I said, do you know Artie Crippen? He says, yeah, he's my student. He's Roosevelt Gainey, who would become my teacher for 10 years. And Roosevelt Gainey was Artie's teacher. He didn't go to class like you and I did. He lived in Connecticut, so he would call by phone. Yeah. But Roosevelt Gainey had saved his life on 2 occasions. One of the times he was walking through a park in the city, New York City, and he was overweight, and he saw Roosevelt, and he says, help me, and Roosevelt said to him, he says, you're a maggot, but I'll help you. And he helped him. He helped him survive on 2 occasions. He saved his life. And Artie, he respected Artie tremendously. And so anyway, that's how I met Roosevelt Gainey, Taoist Qigong Grandmaster. And I studied with him for 10 years. And so that's how I met you, going to class in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And but it was all a result of that pyramid connection and that investigation and the Native American energy. Because Artie's mother was from Hong Kong. She was Chinese. He was half Chinese and half Native American. And he has a lot of gifts. And he was a martial artist who studied, he studied with many people. He knew Bruce Lee as Uncle Lee because Uncle Lee was from Hong Kong and he used to come to the powwows out in Long Island. And so he knew him as Uncle Lee. But he said nobody he had ever seen had the skills and knowledge of Roosevelt Gainey. We know there's at least one person who had better skills than Roosevelt Gainey, and that was his teacher, C.C. Ling.
Right.
With Roosevelt, Gainey would tell you that because he could never beat him. And we don't know what happened to C.C. Ling or where he is, if he's still alive, if he's invisible. But in any case, these were wonderful experiences. But that's kind of how the pyramid fit in. Now, to tie it to Egypt, Egypt was known as Kemet or Kemet. And Keem or is means black, like is in Kemetic, black magic. It has to do with the substance. This substance in the rivers of Abydos, by Abydos in the river of the Nile, can actually transmute gold. It can change substances into what's called monatomic gold. It will change gold into a powdered form. So the black is magic, but more to the point, the word ki, which signifies Keem, which signifies black, ki, K-H-E, is analogous to chi, C-H-I.
I was going to guess. I'm guessing that's where we were going here with that. Okay.
Yeah. So chi and ki. So he could, Roosevelt could talk if he was in the mood or wanted to about Qigong being an ancient Kemetic art, an ancient Egyptian art. It's all, and there's ties I go into in one of my books, The Black Sun, ties between Egypt and Tibet. They have similarities.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that.
Ancient, when you go real ancient. But to fast forward, while all of this is going on over the years, I'm contacted by Dr. David Anderson of the Time Travel Research Organization. Time Travel Research, I can't even remember what it's called. The Time Travel Research Center. And that was a place on Hauppauge, Long Island, where he was doing experiments in time. He was, he signed up for my newsletter. I do a quarterly newsletter called the Montauk Pulse, which has been in print since 1993, which kind of carries, it's, over 26 years of investigation, 25 investigation.
So is that a paid subscription to your Montauk Pulse?
Yes, it is.
Can readers get in on that? Or is it done digitally now, or is it only in print?
Well, I do it by print. It also appears on the website, timetraveleducationcenter.com, to paid subscribers of the website. They can have free access to it. It's not free. It's part of their membership. As a paid subscriber, they can access all of every single one of the newsletters.
Okay.
So this is, and it's quite a bit of reading to do. But in any case, he became a subscriber to that newsletter, And then one day he showed up at one of our meetings. We used to have meetings, Montauk Night, once a month, where we would share information with the public and get information for the public. Well, this was the biggest deal we ever had. It was August 11th, 1999, and there was a big eclipse happening that night. And I was not so much into the eclipse, but eclipse means changes, new beginnings.
Yeah.
And there was a big shadow, and they have a word for it, coming over the earth, and it was going right through a major point in Cornwall, England, that I had pointed out in one of the books that was tied to the Montauk investigation. So it was catching a lot of international attention by astrologers. And anyway, David walked into my life and he told me that he had a time travel research center. And I knew who he was because I had received letters from him. And I didn't know what to make of it. I knew he was the real deal just by the way he talked. Yeah. He wanted to meet with me, take me out to lunch, and he basically had a device about the size of a soccer ball, which he said he could slow time down and speed it up. And it was funded by people, investors in the medical field who wanted to slow down time so organs could be preserved for transplants. So there was financial interest in this, and he could do this on a small scale. It was not developed, I don't know at that point, to the point where it was being used. It would a self-contained field. So anyway, he called me. So we had a relationship where he put up my first website. He helped me. He wanted to help me. But he would come and go because he was always very mysterious. And then one day he called me to his apartment was it Kings Park, Long Island at that time? Not too far from where the center had been. And he says, I've been called away. He says, when you've been in the Air Force, which is where he thought up the ideas for this technology, he did not develop it in the Air Force because the Air Force wasn't interested until he got his papers to leave because they didn't want to pursue it. Then they tried to keep him. Right. But he had to petition Senator Jay Rockefeller of West Virginia, his home state, to get out, and he did. So he's always had a on-again, off-again relationship with the military and or government. So basically, he said that he was going to Moscow. He was given a ticket. He says, take your ticket and your passport. That's all you can take. You'll be back in 2 weeks. He says, if I don't come back in 2 weeks, I want you to make as much noise as possible. He also wanted to do a big event on time travel, an event which was never to happen. Maybe it happened to some degree last August, but it never happened on the scale we wanted it to. It was going to be for universities. And we talked about the event. He took me to we got in a discussion about China and Christmas cards from China because I'd gotten a very strange seasonal card. They don't do Christmas in China, a seasonal card. And he took me to his mantle, the fireplace, and he had all of these Christmas cards from world leaders. They're all from world leaders. And I said, this is very odd. Why is he showing me this? He was just showing me, I've got Christmas. They were up from the last year,
Yeah, why would you put them back? Yeah.
He never put them away.
Yeah.
But in any case, he told me that he talked to many world leaders, and he said most of them were in their position. They didn't know quite how they got there, and they were very desperately trying to do the right thing, but they were very overwhelmed by the circumstances they were involved in. He had sympathy for them. They're not necessarily as we might stereotypically think, according to him. So basically, he didn't come back for a while. So another friend of his contacted me and says, if he doesn't come back after 3 weeks, I'm to contact you. So I made a bunch of noise and we heard from him and he said he would be back. He came back a month later. his emails came out of a server in Pakistan. And this was right after 9/11. This is when the United States had invaded, I think, what did we invaded? Pakistan. What did we invade back then?
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, yeah. Yeah.
That was the first, one of the, yeah.
Well, yeah, that was 2001. Because this all happened right after 9/11. In fact, one of my Romanian friends, he introduced me to, who's now the head of nuclear security in Romania, he actually came to the United States right before 9/11, or right as 9/11 was happening, and he was going to see the Time Travel Research Center because he knew David, and David had told him. And as a result of 9/11, he couldn't see it because they wouldn't allow foreign nationals. That was a government stipulation.
Yeah.
So he did not get to see it.
Mm.
So he's always very interested in anything that, David has to tell me, and vice versa. We share stories when we're in Romania. So in any case, that was 2001. David disappeared. He came back, thanked me for what I did, and I didn't see or hear much of him. And then one day, he basically had to shut down the research center. Apparently, he was having a lot of security problems. The government told him, we can take care of your security problems if you join us, which told me they were causing it. Yeah. In any case, he shut down the research center, and he went to Rochester, where he worked for Bosch Industries, a German company that had a presence in America.
Right.
And then so I didn't really talk to him till 2003. He invited me. He says, look, I've got all this stuff from the research center. It's shut down. I'd like you to have it. I don't know who else to give it to. He says, you'll need a station wagon or something. We can meet halfway between Long Island and Rochester.
Yeah.
So basically, I talked Preston Nichols into doing it because Preston Nichols had a van, which was perfect. And he was interested to see David again. So Preston and I got in a van and we drove up to Rochester. It was about an 8 to 9 hour drive. And we met with David. We all together put all the boxes from his Hummer into the van, and we invited him to dinner. I was looking forward to talking to him. He says, I'm sorry, I can't do dinner. I've only got about 15 minutes to spend with you. And we talked for 15 minutes, and he said, I can't work with you for 5 years. I'm going to be involved in some other stuff. He said, really? Okay, all right. So and Preston and I had some really neat adventures that coming home. We spent the night in a hotel, and we visited the Mormon church. It was Easter Sunday up in can't even remember the place where the Mormon where Joseph Smith discovered the tablets. Can't even remember the name of it. Cumorah, Hill Cumorah. And yeah, we went there. There was nobody on the campus, not a soul on Easter Sunday. And we were then, I think, dogged by them esoterically because we stopped by Preston's house and they tried to break the contract on Preston's house after we visited them. But in any case, that's a side story, which goes into very deep threads. However, there was no lack of intrigue at that time. Anyway, that was the end of David Anderson, except for a mysterious postcard or a polite postcard now and then. I might hear from him. Maybe I got one phone call in those 5 years. And then, meanwhile, I had been given this book, which I call Transylvania Sunrise in English.
Because that's what I was just going to get back to. So how does all of this link to your Transylvanian experiments?
well, not my experiments, but my adventures.
Experiences, adventures.
It's a good question. And I'm actually writing that into my newsletter right now. But so I was given a book. The Montauk Project Experiments in Time was translated into Romanian. Now, I thought, mistakenly thought that David was influential in that because he did meet the publisher. But he was not influential in it, to my knowledge. But he had a presence in Romania because when I first met him, he had just got back from Romania because he was invited to speak at a camp there known as Atlanticron. So right after he was in Romania, he visited me for the first time. Right after.
Okay.
Because, I mean, it was within a week or so.
Yeah.
And he came to the meeting, the eclipse happens, and then he wants to meet with me. And so he says, yeah, I just got back from Romania, had a wonderful time. There's people I'd like you to meet there. I'd really like you to go to this camp someday. That was 1999. I didn't go to the camp for 9 years later. Okay. And basically this book was picked up by a publisher. The Montauk Project was picked up by a publisher, translated into Romanian. It was read by a member of the most secret service of the Romanian government, known as Department Zero. And that book, and he says, I have a book to write. Would you like to publish the book to the publisher? The publisher says, yes. He publishes his book. They translate it into English and send it to me. It sat on my desk for 4 years. It was only because when I was practicing Qigong, when I got to meet you, if you remember a man named Ernie who used to come, remember Ernie?
Vaguely.
Ernie used to box a lot. Ernie was an older man. He was
Yep.
He had an auto shop.
Ernie the boxer. Yep.
Yeah. He was in great shape in his 70s. He offered to fix my car, and he did a good job.
Yeah.
And because I didn't have any heat in my car, so because I would sit down in his garage in Brooklyn, I brought the manuscript with me because a friend of mine in November, I once brought a friend of mine to class who was visiting me from, Washington State. And I said, read this book, see if it's any good. He read it. He says, you've got to publish it. So I then read it while I was sitting in Ernie's car repair shop. I said, wow, I finally had time to read it. I made use of my time. It was easier to sit in the shop all day. It was like 2 days I had to sit there, I think. Or maybe it was one day, and I got to read it. I started it initially, but I couldn't finish it. I read it. I said, wow. So I started negotiations in December. In March, or it was actually right before Easter, we signed a contract with the Romanian publisher, and David writes to me within 7 days, and he says, how would you like to go to Romania? As soon as I made this deal, consummated this business deal, David says, how would you like to go to Romania? I will pay all of your expenses and you can take somebody else too. So I said, yes. And this set up a lot of drama and intrigue. And I came to Romania in 2008. And that was, so I didn't, so basically, I went over there hoping to hear a lot, and I didn't hear too much. He basically said that he couldn't say anything, and but that he would be back in the time travel business in about a year. And certainly he was. This following year, I went back to Romania. He paid my way the first year. The second year, I gathered up my own funds, ran special promotions, and returned. And I did something that few people would do. Many people were invited there. I was taught by the professors where to go in Romania. They told me to go to Transylvania, to go to a place called Sarmisegetuza, which is the most sacred place to the ancient.
Okay.
And that did a whole lot of things. Now, we fast forwarded, because we're eating up the minutes here, but we fast forward to 2010, where David announces on the radio that he's experimenting with humans. Humans can now go back in time. This little thing that was the size of a soccer ball has now been developed into a full-blown time reactor, which can send people back in time, send them into the future. Now, he announces that in 2010. In 2009, he gave a lecture, and we would lecture together at this camp. He'd run out of gas, and then I'd talk about from another perspective, because I certainly didn't have his scientific background.
Right.
And basically, he laid out, and you can find the stuff he lectured on, theandersoninstitute.com. Don't try and contact him because you won't get an answer. That the links are dead, but the website is still good. Now, what I did years later, based upon the education that he gave me, and it was private tutoring at one point about a very important spot, a point. I broke that down, and I put a video series together, which is based upon an article I wrote, which impressed him very much. He says, nobody has the patience to break down what you did. He says, can I please use this when I go to universities and lecture? I said, certainly you can. And I put his name on it, because he's the one who, I'm taking his language and making it simpler, not inventing it. I then took it one step further the following year, and I created videos. It's called Time Travel Theory Explained, which you can look at the whole theory of time travel on timetraveleducationcenter.com. It's junior high school level math and physics, junior high school level math and physics, that you can understand how time travel works. The only thing I would say is if you watch it once and you don't understand it, don't be insulted. It takes a while to sink in, because it took me a long time to put it together. It's just so simple that people overlook it. And when I first learned this principle, which is explained very patiently, it's called the invariance of the space-time interval. I would be in his presence. He'd write it out and explain it, and I'd understand it. When I'm out of his presence, I didn't understand it. I had to fight. I had to go through certain physics books and reteach myself. And I did it, and then it was years later, through doing the Qigong practice of the dark room, immersing myself into complete darkness, and then I'd come out and read his website, I was able to put it together that anyone can understand. Now, the most interesting thing about this, you can go to the timetraveleducationcenter.com, you can look and you can see, oh great, time travel is possible. Theoretically. That's all it will tell you. Now, there's also a patent application for a time reactor. A patent application, which is a legal document that he filed. It's been sequestered. There is a whole story, behind how it came into my hands, but basically it was for public relations purposes. But the thing is even having that patent, you're not going to be able to build a time reactor yourself. It's just, it was sequestered because the government doesn't know they do know what to do with them. They use them as a resource because they know other countries are working on this. China, India has the biggest facilities in the world on time travel. I learned this from David.
Really?
Yes.
That's surprising, yeah.
And he's very, I guess, has trepidations about what they do with it. He said they were sending drones in. He said this about 8 years ago. They were sending drones back into time, and he did not like that because according to his research, you change the timeline irrevocably.
Yeah.
And so anyway, one of the big revelations in 2016, he came out of the woodwork after I patiently, maybe I did the videos a year later. After I did this article, which he liked, he came out of the woodwork and said, yeah, I will do a podcast with you. That podcast is for members of the website. And there's a podcast preparing you for what him, and then he's on there with me for at least 2 hours. And 2016 was the last, well, it's not the last conversation I had with him. But he really went into it, and he said I asked him to tell me what he could tell me about Romania, which we haven't even got into Romania. But he basically said there is a location in Romania known as Choclovina Cave, which has evidence of a time reactor discharge. It's the biggest evidence of reaction of what's called a time discharge in a cave. And I said, David, by the way, did you know that I was at that cave last summer? Really? He was shocked. Yeah. Because he hasn't been to the cave physically. Yeah. I don't know if he's been there through his time reactor, but he's been there. But I've been there, and I've been there twice. I'm going back again this summer.
So what kind of remains are there of what you call a discharge from the time reactor in the cave, if you're willing to share that?
Are witnessed in the sediment. Okay. It's a huge cave full of bat guano. It's a bat cave.
Yeah.
And I was being called to Romania by the bat frequency before I even got involved in time travel. I wrote a whole book about it, my last book called The White Bat. I was having a dream of a white bat in Romania, of Dracula turning into a white bat. And I was being summoned to Romania in the dream state in 1989. I got involved with Montauk in 1990. So this was working a heavy metaphysical process on me. I even discovered I'm now married to a Romanian woman, and her mother showed me a species of white bats in Transylvania that the world doesn't know about. Showed me there's a lot of things that people don't know about Romania.
Well, we may have to cut this short today, but because I've got to be someplace. But maybe we do another series on this if you're willing, and we get in the Transylvanian Romanian aspect of your adventures.
Because I just scratched the first surface. We talked about time
travel.
We
really didn't get to much detail. So I'd love to be able to dive deep into this, and if you're willing.
I'm more than happy to, Barbara. And it's nice to see your face again and to talk to you. Even though you're down under in the corner, the other corner of the world.
That's right. That's right. We have a lot of very special places too, and hopefully we can do a little bit of merging with some of the information of time bleeds and time travel from down here.
Okay. Look forward to it.
All right. So the best place to reach you is through your website, timetravelcenter.com. Is that right?
Time Travel Education Center.
Time Travel Education Center. Okay.
People can buy books at skybooksusa.com. You can look up Peter Moon on Amazon, and there's ebooks available. And if you want to write to me at petermoon333@gmail.com. petermoon333@gmail.com or skybooks@yahoo.com.
Great. Well, thanks, Peter. I can't wait to catch up again. This was absolutely fascinating, and I'd love to do it again. So hopefully we'll set a time soon.
Okay,
great.
That'll be great.
All right, take care. All right, I'm going to just do this so I've got my time and know that, okay, there's my stop recording.